I paid their rent for a year, then found out they went on a luxury vacation without me. They called me, the glue, begged for help, and promised they'd pay me back. Then I got a photo, my entire family, poolside at a 5-star resort I unknowingly paid for. No invite. No thank you. Just silence, until I confronted them. Their excuse? You would have ruined the mood. That was the day I stopped being their son and started being their consequence. My name's Brandon, I'm 27, and up until last week, I honestly thought I was just doing the right thing, the kind of son any parent would be proud to have. For the past year, I took on the responsibility of financially supporting my family because I believed it was my duty, plain and simple. Rent overdue? I covered it. Dad's truck needed repairs? I sent the cash. My younger siblings were behind on college tuition? I stepped in without hesitation. I never griped or held it over their heads because, well, they're my family, and that's what you're supposed to do when people you love are struggling. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I work in tech, make decent money, not rich by any means, but enough to live comfortably and still help out. It started with a few emergencies here and there, unexpected bills, medical stuff, car trouble, and every time they came to me, I just handled it. No questions asked. I grew up watching my parents stress about money constantly, and I swore if I ever got to a better place, I'd make sure they never had to worry like that again. That was the promise I made to myself. But what started as helping out turned into something else entirely. Something that didn't feel like support anymore, it felt like obligation. And worse than that, it felt one-sided. I wasn't giving out of love anymore. I was expected to give. And still, even then, I told myself this is what good sons do. At first, when my parents needed help, they'd ask in that careful way, Brandon, if you're able to chip in this month, we'd be grateful. It sounded like a request, like something temporary. But over time, that tone disappeared. There was no more asking, just straight-up expectations. It shifted from, can you help, to send it to mom's account before Friday. No explanation, no conversation. I went from being their son to being their direct deposit. The worst part was no one else in the family stepped up, not even a little. My younger brother, Kyle, was always out with his friends, decked out in new sneakers and fresh jackets, like he didn't have a care in the world. My sister, Madison, had this intense skincare routine and weekly shopping hauls, like rent and groceries were someone else's problem, and yeah, they were. Mine. Neither of them ever offered to help out, not even once. I kept waiting for one of them to say, hey, maybe I can chip in this month, but that moment never came. Meanwhile, I was covering rent, utilities, medical bills, car repairs, you name it. It wasn't just the money that wore me down. It was the silence. No thank yous, no check-ins to see how I was doing, just a quiet assumption that I'd handle it like I always did. I started feeling less like a son and more like a safety net, and deep down, I was getting tired, mentally, emotionally, and yeah, financially too. But admitting that felt like betrayal. I kept telling myself, they need you, just hold on a little longer, even as the weight got heavier every month. The first time I tried to set a boundary, it wasn't even a hard one. I told my dad I could only cover half the rent that month because I had a few bills of my own coming up. I expected maybe a little disappointment or even understanding, but what I got instead was pure anger. He didn't sound worried or stressed, he sounded insulted, like I'd just committed some kind of betrayal. He launched into this whole speech about how much they'd sacrificed to raise me, how I owed them, now that I was doing well. Parents give everything to their kids, he said. Now it's your turn. That line hit me harder than I expected. It stuck with me long after the call ended, like a splinter under my skin. I sat there staring at my phone, replaying his words over and over, wondering how we'd gone from love and support to keeping score. And yet, even after all that, I caved. I wired over the full amount that same night. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument, that keeping the peace was more important than making a point. But deep down, I was furious with them, with myself. That was the first time I really felt it, that cold, sinking realization that I wasn't just being generous anymore. I was being used. And no matter how badly I wanted to believe otherwise, the love didn't feel unconditional anymore. It felt transactional. It happened out of nowhere, just a casual conversation with Madison over text. We were going back and forth about some random thing when she mentioned something about the resort. I paused, confused, and replied, "What resort?" For a moment there was silence. Then she texted back, "Wait, you don't know?" My stomach dropped. "No what?" I asked. No reply. I waited. Called her, no answer. Called my mom, straight to voicemail. Same with my dad. Kyle didn't pick up either. Something felt off. Then, out of nowhere, Madison texted again. A single photo. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It was my entire family, Mom, Dad, Kyle, and Madison lounging beside a bright blue pool at what looked like a luxury resort. They had drinks in hand, sunglasses on, huge smiles like something out of a travel commercial. Behind them, I could see the kind of beach you only get at exclusive places with cabanas and clean white sand. I just sat there frozen, holding my phone, heart thudding. 3 days ago, just 3 days, Mom told me money was tight again. She said they weren't sure they'd make rent. She sounded stressed. I sent her extra money that same night. And there they were, sipping cocktails on vacation without me. Not a word. Not an invite. Not even a heads up. They didn't just lie to me, they excluded me. On purpose. In that moment, I didn't even know what I was feeling. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just betrayal. It was this deep, hollow ache that sat heavy in my chest. I had sacrificed for them, taken on their problems like they were mine, and they thanked me by cutting me out the second it was convenient. It took me a few hours to calm down enough to call her. I was still shaking, still staring at that damn photo like it would somehow change if I looked long enough. When I finally dialed, she picked up on the third ring, sounding annoyed. Not guilty. Not nervous. Annoyed. Brandon, I can't talk right now, we're having dinner, she said, with laughter echoing faintly in the background like everything was perfectly fine. I kept my voice steady. Where are you? Silence. Then she replied, what do you mean? I didn't even bother playing games. I mean you're not home struggling to pay bills. You're at a resort. A luxury resort. That I probably paid for. Another pause. Then she let out this long, tired sigh, like I was the one being unreasonable. Brandon, we needed this. Things have been really stressful. You have no idea what it's like trying to keep this family together. I almost laughed. No, I do know. Because I've been the one doing it. I've paid your rent, your utilities, your emergencies. And you didn't think I'd find out. Her tone shifted immediately, growing sharp and defensive. Don't be dramatic. It was just a little getaway. We needed to relax. This is an all-inclusive resort, I shot back. 3 days ago, you told me you couldn't afford rent. And then she said it, the line that changed everything. You would have ruined the mood. I sat there, gripping my phone so hard I thought it might crack. Excuse me, I whispered. She sighed again, like I was being childish. You've been so negative lately, Brandon. Always worrying about money, stressing everyone out. We didn't want to deal with that kind of energy. We just needed to breathe for once. I was silent. I didn't even know what to say. And then, like she was offering some kind of peace treaty, she added, look, we'll make it up to you, okay? Maybe next year we'll take you with us. But this time it was just for us. That was the moment I mentally checked out. That was the second I knew I was done. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for understanding. I just ended the call and sat there in the dark, staring at the wall while every memory of sacrifice and struggle played through my mind. If they thought they could use me forever, they were wrong. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. That night, I didn't answer any more calls. Not from my mom, not from my dad, not from anyone. She tried to follow up with texts, half-hearted apologies like, don't be mad, and manipulative jabs like, after everything we've done for you. I didn't even open them. I left them sitting there, unread, while I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every single time I had stepped in to save them. Every overdraft I cleared. Every emergency I handled at the last minute. Every rent payment I made without hesitation. I used to tell myself it was only money. That family came first. But it wasn't just about money anymore, it was about respect. And they had none for me. The next morning, my phone looked like it had been through a war. Over a dozen missed calls. A flood of messages from both of my parents. My dad had finally decided to chime in too, his tone predictably different. His texts were colder, more aggressive, accusing me of overreacting, telling me to grow up, as if standing up for myself was childish. My mom was still trying to smooth things over, pretending this was just a misunderstanding. Not a single message contained the word sorry. Not one of them took ownership. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, reading their messages like they were from strangers, like these weren't the people who raised me. Something in me shifted. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain. They knew exactly what they were doing and they didn't regret it. All that was left for me to do was make sure they never had the chance to do it again. Then came my siblings. Madison texted first. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Just talk to them. Please. A few minutes later, Kyle chimed in. Dude, you're taking this way too far. Too far? I nearly laughed out loud. None of them had said a word when I was bleeding myself dry to keep the family afloat. They didn't care when I was emptying my bank account for rent, for food, for bills. They only cared now because the money was gone. Not one of them said we're sorry. They were just scared because their free ride had ended, and I had no plans to bring it back. A few days passed in silence before I got an email from my mom with the subject line, "We need to talk." I hovered over the delete button for a second, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It started like some cheap attempt at reconciliation. "We love you, Brandon. We're sorry you feel this way. Let's talk and work things out as a family." But halfway through, the tone shifted, and it got real manipulative real fast. "We didn't want to tell you this, but we're in serious trouble. The rent is due, and we don't have enough to cover it. We never thought you'd abandon us like this. You know we rely on you." No gratitude, no recognition for everything I had already done, just a straight-up expectation that I'd continue providing. And then came the kicker. "Your brother and sister are worried about you. They say you've changed, that you're cold, selfish even. Honestly, we're starting to agree. You've been distant ever since you moved out. This isn't who you are. We raised you better." I slammed my laptop shut, chest tight, heart pounding. That was the final straw. Not only were they not sorry, they were trying to twist this around like I was the villain. Like I was the one who broke the family. I stood up, paced around the room, fists clenched. Then I sat back down, cracked my knuckles, and wrote them back. "Mom. Dad. I read your email. I've thought about what you said, and you're right, I have changed. I'm finally seeing things clearly. You didn't rely on me, you used me. You took my kindness, my help, and treated it like an obligation. You cut me out when it suited you and only came crawling back when you needed more. You're not entitled to my money. I'm not your ATM. I'm done being manipulated. Maybe next time you plan a luxury vacation, you should think about what happens when you come home. Good luck." I stared at that message for a few seconds before hitting send, the biggest grin on my face. 30 minutes later, Madison texted me, "What did you say to Mom?" "She's crying." Then Kyle, "Dude, you went too far." And finally my dad, who had never left me a voicemail before, sent one with his voice low and angry. "You fix this, Brandon, or there will be consequences." I didn't reply. I didn't even listen to it again. But I knew they wouldn't stop. And sure enough, the next night came a loud, aggressive knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and there they were, my parents, standing stiff and pissed. My dad's jaw was clenched, my mom's arms crossed, her face locked into that fake disappointed look. I opened the door and leaned against the frame. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. My mom instantly softened her voice. "Brandon, sweetheart, please can we just talk?" "No," I said. "Say whatever you came here to say, then leave." My dad stepped forward, red-faced and barely holding it together. "You think you're so tough now, huh? Ignoring our calls, sending that disgusting email after all we've done for you." I raised an eyebrow. "All you've done for me? You mean feeding me as a child? Providing a roof when I was a kid? You mean the bare minimum every parent is supposed to do?" My mom gasped like I'd slapped her. "How could you be so ungrateful?" "Ungrateful?" I shot back. "I paid your rent for a year. I stocked your fridge. I kept you from losing your house. And when you finally had some breathing room, you went on vacation without me. Then came back expecting me to clean up your mess again." They didn't say a word. I stepped aside and motioned to the living room. "Come in." They hesitated, exchanged glances, then walked in slow, like they expected me to explode. I didn't. I calmly walked over to the counter, grabbed a folder, and set it on the coffee table in front of them. "What's this?" my dad asked. "Every payment I've made for you over the last year. Every single dollar." I leaned in, looked him straight in the eye. "So we're clear on exactly how much I've done for you." He barely glanced at it before scoffing. "So now you're keeping score?" "Yeah," I said without hesitation. "Because I need you to understand, I owe you nothing. And you're not entitled to my help anymore." My mom's voice trembled. "Brandon, please. We have nowhere else to go." For a split second, I felt that familiar guilt rising. But then I remembered her voice on the phone, laughing at dinner while telling me I'd have ruined the mood. I took a slow breath. Maybe you should have thought about that before you made it clear I wasn't part of this family anymore. My dad snapped. "You selfish little brat," he spat. You sit here in your cozy apartment with your steady job while your family suffers, and you just cut us off? Yeah, I replied calmly. Exactly. My mom covered her mouth like she was about to cry. My dad stood there shaking, then suddenly stormed forward and knocked the folder off the table, papers flying everywhere. I didn't move, didn't flinch. He wanted a reaction. I wasn't giving him one. I looked him dead in the eye. Are you finished? He gave a cold laugh. You're gonna regret this. Mark my words. I tilted my head. Are you threatening me? He didn't answer. I stepped forward, voice ice cold. Get out. My mom's face crumbled. Brandon, please. Get out. For the first time in my life, my dad looked unsure. Then he grabbed my mom's arm and pulled her toward the door. You better hope you never need us for anything, he growled over his shoulder. I just smiled. I won't. I opened the door. They hesitated, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I stood there in silence until they finally walked out. I closed the door behind them, locked it, and stood still, breathing slowly. I thought I'd feel relief. But something told me this wasn't the end, not yet. They were barely out the door when I knew I had to make it crystal clear there was no going back. I spent the next hour gathering every bank statement, every PayPal receipt, every text message asking for help, every note where they promised to pay me back and never did. I printed it all, organized it, and stuffed it neatly into a folder, cold, hard proof of everything I'd done for them. I wasn't doing it for drama. I just needed the facts in front of them, undeniable and raw. So when they showed up again a few days later, my dad with that same clenched jaw, my mom looking worn down but still trying to hold on to whatever act she was playing, I was ready. I let them in without a word, didn't even bother asking what they wanted. I walked straight to the folder, set it down on the table between us, and stepped back. That's everything, I said calmly. Every cent I've paid. Every time you said you'd cover it and didn't. I want you to see it, no spin, no excuses. My dad picked up a page, glanced at it, then tossed it back down like it was garbage. So what, you're keeping a ledger now? Like we're your clients? I didn't blink. No, I'm keeping a record so you don't get to rewrite history. He scoffed, shaking his head, pacing like he didn't know what to do with himself. This is pathetic, he muttered. You think this makes you right? It just makes you look bitter. I stayed rooted in place, voice even. No, it makes me done. You can call it whatever you want, but this ends here. My mom sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded like she was about to pray. Brandon, please. We've made mistakes. But we're family. We didn't mean to hurt you. I took a breath. Then maybe you shouldn't have left me out while you were drinking margaritas on the beach. Maybe you shouldn't have told me I'd ruin the mood while I was sending rent money. Maybe you should have acted like I mattered before the money stopped. My dad's face turned red, and without warning he lunged forward, smacked the folder off the table again, papers flying everywhere in a chaotic blur. I didn't move. He was waiting for me to shout, to fight back, but I wasn't giving him that. I stood there, calm, collected, and completely done. Are you finished? I asked, my voice ice. His lips curled in a sneer. You'll regret this, Brandon. One day you'll come crawling back. Just wait. I tilted my head slightly. You threatening me again? He didn't answer. Just stood there, breathing heavy, fists clenched like he wanted to throw something else. I pointed to the door. Get out. My mom's voice cracked, desperate now. Please don't do this, we need you. We're falling apart. That's not my problem anymore, I said, unmoving. I've done more than enough. For a long second no one spoke. Then my dad grabbed her arm and turned toward the door. Don't expect us to forgive you, he said, his voice low. Don't worry, I replied without flinching. I don't want your forgiveness. I opened the door. They walked out slowly, like they thought I might stop them. I didn't. I closed the door behind them, locked it, and stood there in silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I wasn't wondering how much I'd have to give up next. It was over. And I meant it. I didn't hear from them for a few days, and for a second I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, they got the message. That maybe they realized they'd gone too far this time. But then I got a text from my brother, short and weirdly serious. Brandon, you need to be careful. This is bigger than you think. I just stared at the screen, brows furrowed, trying to figure out what that even meant. I called him. He answered on the first ring, voice hushed like he didn't want someone to hear him. "They're planning something," he said. "I don't know exactly what, but it's not just about money anymore. They're trying to turn everyone against you." I leaned back in my chair, the words settling like a stone in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He hesitated. "I've heard them talking. They're spinning the story, telling relatives, friends, anyone who'll listen that you've changed, that you're acting out, being selfish. They want everyone to believe you abandoned them." I closed my eyes for a second, the pieces clicking into place. It all made sense now. The guilt, the sudden accusations, the dramatic texts, they weren't trying to repair anything. They were trying to control the narrative. Twist it. Make themselves the victims and me the bad guy. It was never just about money. It was about power. About control. For the first time in my life, I was out from under their thumb and they couldn't handle it. They were scrambling, not because they missed me, but because they couldn't manipulate me anymore. "Thanks for telling me," I said quietly, feeling the familiar weight in my chest again. "But I've already made my decision. I'm done." And I meant it. Whatever they were planning, whoever they tried to rally against me, it didn't matter. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to beg to be understood. Let them say whatever they wanted. I had nothing left to prove. It came in the middle of a quiet afternoon while I was scrolling through my phone, not thinking about them for once. A group text popped up. My parents, Madison, and Kyle, all lumped together in one thread like some kind of intervention. The message was short, dramatic, and laughably predictable. "We need to talk. This family is falling apart and we need you to fix it. This isn't just about money, Brandon. Please come home. Be the man you used to be." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button, heart pounding, not out of guilt, but out of sheer disbelief. This was it. Their last play. Their final attempt to rope me back in under the illusion of unity and concern. But I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a cry for healing, it was a desperate bid to pull me back into the same cycle they'd kept me trapped in for years. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I opened my settings, blocked the entire group, then one by one, blocked them individually. Phone numbers, social media, email. Every possible channel gone. I erased the messages and sat in the stillness of my apartment, heart finally beating slow, mind finally quiet. No more guilt. No more responsibility for people who only knew how to take. I had given them chances more than they ever deserved, and they took every one of them for granted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was done. Completely and unapologetically done. I should have known they wouldn't let it in with silence. A few days after I blocked them, there was a knock at my door, not loud or aggressive this time, just steady and slow. I looked through the peephole and there they were again, my mom and dad, but not like before. They looked smaller somehow, worn down, faces pale and eyes puffy like they hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I didn't even recognize them. They weren't angry or defiant. They looked defeated. I opened the door but didn't step aside. I didn't invite them in. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. My mom was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Brandon, please. Listen to us. We're sorry. We were wrong. We didn't want to lose you. Things have gotten out of hand." My dad followed, his voice soft and shaky in a way I'd never heard before. "Son, don't do this. We need you. You're the only one who can fix this. Please." And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that familiar pull, the need to help, to be the one who saves everyone. But then I remembered everything. The lies, the manipulation, the guilt trips, the vacation they took while pretending to struggle. I remembered being excluded, blamed, used. And I knew what I had to say. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You've had enough chances. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repaid me. I'm finished." My mom's face crumbled like she wanted to collapse right there. My dad looked like he'd swallowed a stone. "Please," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Don't turn your back on your family." I shook my head slowly. "I already did. You just didn't notice until it was too late." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, calm, clear, and sure. Then I closed the door, locked it without hesitation, and walked away. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace. Weeks passed and I didn't hear a word. No calls, no messages, no knocks at the door. Just silence. And for the first time in a long, long while, that silence felt like peace. My days were lighter. My mind wasn't constantly spinning with anxiety about who needed what, or how I'd stretch my paycheck to cover someone else's crisis. I woke up without dread. I ate without pressure. I finally felt free, truly deeply free. Then one afternoon I got one last email. It was from Madison. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I almost didn't open it, but something told me I should at least see what she had to say. Inside, she poured her heart out. She said she understood now why I did what I did. That I didn't deserve how I was treated. That the family was falling apart without me, and if I didn't come back, things would never be the same. She begged me to reconsider. Said I was the glue holding everyone together. I didn't even finish reading it. I closed it and deleted it without a second thought. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel guilt. I felt done. That chapter of my life was over and there was no need to reread it. I had finally reclaimed something that had been slipping away from me for years, my self-worth, my boundaries, my identity. They used to say I was the one holding the family together, but the truth is I was the one being held back. Now I'm moving forward. And I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know I'll never go back to being that version of me, the one who gave and gave until there was nothing left. So here's my question to you, whoever's reading this: was I wrong to walk away? Should I have tried harder, held on longer? Or was this the only way to finally be free?